Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual by let's call him my small friend, my little
Oh,
friend, my friend in the garden, Tucker Hazel.
say hello to my little friend, Tucker Hazel. So you should. That's what you should have done. Just imagine that he did that, guys.
Imagine that I made a Scarface reference. You know who's a big fan of Pikmin? Brian De
Miyamoto?
Palma.
Oh, I think one of us is right.
We don't know who. Leave in the comments who you think likes Pikmin more, Shigeru Miyamoto or Brian De Palma. And
That's
while
a
you're
great
down
point.
there, ring the bell, like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Discord,
Yes,
and talk with us about Pikmin.
I'll
And
make a
talk
Pikmin
to
channel right now.
me like a Pikmin channel. You can also talk to us about Brian De Palma, frankly. That's also acceptable.
Yeah,
Mission
yeah.
Impossible 1, Scarface, Blowout. So many
Oh
great
yeah.
Brian De Palma films to choose from four. And speaking of
Mm-hmm.
four,
Oh,
there's a new Pikmin
Pikmin.
game coming out.
Oh
And
yeah.
here's the crazy thing, Tucker. When the audience is watching this video,
Yeah.
they could be playing Pikmin 4 because the game is out.
Yeah. While listening to this video.
The reason we are
Oof.
making this video right now is because we can't play Pikmin 4.
Yeah. And
Because
what are we
Pikmin
gonna
4 is not
do?
out
Talk
yet.
about Pikmin. That's the only option.
No,
I
that's
may
the
have
only
just
option.
beaten Exoprimal, but I wasn't even paying attention because I was thinking about Pikmin the whole time.
I mean, you were also just trying to block out the fact you're playing Exoprimal.
Well,
I'm sorry, I am talking to the preeminent Exoprimal man on the internet, 4.5
Thank you.
out of
Thank
5
you.
stars, Tucker Hazel, Exoprimal expert. But speaking of being an expert, speaking of giving things 4.5 stars or higher,
Yeah.
today we just wanted to sit down very casually and chat about why we love Pikmin.
Yeah.
Specifically you and I, because we didn't solicit the community this time. So community,
Oops.
I'm
I
sorry,
meant to do
stand down.
Stand down.
What you'll do is you'll watch the video as you do, and then you'll come to the Discord and say, you shower us the accolades you always shower us
Yes.
with,
Yeah.
and then you'll just continue the conversation
10
from
out of
there.
10s all across the board. Everyone's like, God damn, that new BLB video.
Of course.
Yeah, showing up all those award shows.
But Tucker, I think we fucked up the video badly enough at this point.
That's
That
fine, yeah.
we might as well just really
It's a
dig
video for
in.
Pikmin fans.
It's a
Who are
video for
already
Pikmin
pretty
fans.
fucked up.
And the other thing about Pikmin fans, Tucker, is that they're used to waiting a long time for things.
That's a
And
great
so
point.
you got to wait a
Like
couple
getting to the
minutes.
point.
Yeah, you got to wait a couple minutes for it to get to the point. It's fine. You waited 10 years for Pikmin 3. You waited 10 years for Pikmin 4.
Mhm.
So now let's just chat about it. Tucker, I want to
Yeah.
keep this a very casual conversation because Pikmin,
This is the casual episode.
this is casual. Pikmin is very meaningful to both of us.
Yeah.
For me, for a number of reasons that are both personal and sort of analytical, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
And I kind of want to talk about both sides of the coin. But
Yeah.
is it even possible, Tucker, for a man of your skill level, man of your eloquence, to sum up why you love Pikmin?
Yes. Let's go with yes.
Okay.
On that one. I think one very simple reason why Pikmin sticks in my mind
Yeah.
more than many franchises is because I think it might be one of the most consistent video game franchises I've ever played. Not
Sure.
only are the games frankly more similar than most of Nintendo's franchises, the wheel has not been reinvented that many times. I guess you can say, hey, Pikmin is something a little different, but when it comes to those core 3 titles, all of which I've played all the way through, enjoyed immensely, I give them all a 9 out of 10, but I also have a very clear ranking in my head.
Yeah.
But it's also the kind of thing where you can make a case for any of the games being your favorite or your
Yeah.
least favorite. But I think that it's very hard for anyone who likes Pikmin to say that any one is miles and miles better than the rest. And I love how consistent, yet how small yet important the differences are. And it makes the series very, very fun to talk about and analyze and compare with other fans, because you don't get many franchises where every core entry is a banger. And
Yeah.
we're looking down the barrel like say like the GoldenEye 007 intro of Pikmin 4 releasing, and hopefully that is also out of the list of being in that same echelon. But yeah, the consistency of this franchise is almost unmatched, and it makes
Yeah.
it so much fun to discuss and debate.
Yeah, I mean that's really a great point, because you would think that maybe that wouldn't be the case, considering Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 2. You would assume we're going to be in very close conversation on a design level, on a quality level, because they were released so close to each other.
Mhm.
But then you would imagine that a decade passes and
Yeah.
Pikmin 3, especially coming from Nintendo, might look different than Pikmin 1 and 2. And it does. But unless you're really in the weeds of sort of the design philosophies of Pikmin, it does look very similar.
It does. Absolutely does.
And even Pikmin 4, and yeah, I got a little bit of the heebies and the heebie-jeebies from that first hour of the Pikmin 4 demo. But
Yeah.
even once I got into it, I was like, man, this is the Pikmin I know and love. But there's just sort of being funneled in a different way, but also retaining so
Yeah.
much about what makes the other games special and synthesizing them. So you're right. There's a very, and I think the way I would put it is that there's a very clear understanding of what Pikmin is trying to do.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't mean a clear understanding in terms of what it can be, because I think sometimes you get a series where it's very obvious, these are the parameters of what a game in our franchise is.
Yeah.
And it's not going to move beyond that, right? Pikmin, I think, is always introducing new locations and ways of interacting with the world and various things. But it's just doing so around this one core idea. It's making one game in Pikmin 1 that's all about like mechanical friction and about task management. There's a really great interview that hopefully a lot of people watching this have read with a lot of the dev teams.
I might it on there.
Of Pikmin 1 and 2, talking about how that game's about task management. And then in Pikmin 2, the game's about type management. It's about collection, and it's about engaging with the world in different ways, and about like roguelike caves. And 3 is kind of synthesizing maybe a little bit of that from Pikmin 2.
There's definitely a lot of task management in 3 because you have 3 captains and they can act somewhat autonomously. I do like how the series tracks and evolves over time, and for my taste, it has only continued to get more interesting, and we'll see if Pikmin 4 retains that trend. But again, with the consistency of the franchise, even though I would say that Pikmin 1 is my least favorite, it still I put it on my favorite games of all time list when I finish it, and also that happened with the other 2 games. And I think it'd be interesting to sort of go through bit by bit what we like about each game, because you're talking about like the different design philosophy of each one, and you and I both being big fans of all these games, we kind of break down which elements work for us or don't. But starting with Pikmin 1, let's talk about that mechanical friction, because this is a term that you and I have been using quite a bit in our conversations recently. But Pikmin is one of those core examples, and frankly, and I think this is maybe a good place to start this kind of conversation, that is not only my least favorite part of Pikmin 1. Though it's still one of my favorite games, so ultimately it doesn't matter too much. But it's also the thing that kept me away from the series for the longest time. Because for a while, I not only didn't really have access to Pikmin, I was thinking, okay, how am I going to go get a GameCube? Because I don't want to... I was thinking, the motion controls on like the Wii U, the Wii ports on Wii U, that's going to like take away from the experience. I want the core experience, and I don't want to spend $70 on Pikmin, so I didn't get it on GameCube. But what also kept me away is hearing how much time pressure there was. And to that point, I don't think I'd played any game where there was... You can lose your Pikmin, and they'll die on the planet if you're running back and they don't make it to the rocket and all of that. But that is one of the elements that keeps it so distinct, especially from other Nintendo franchises. There are no other than Majora's Mask, time limit Nintendo franchises. And so while that is the element that I steer away from personally the most, and it is the element that kept me away from it for the longest, biting that bullet and experiencing that mechanical friction not only gave me a series that I love, but allowed me to appreciate a different style of Nintendo design, because this is, especially with Pikmin 1, kind of one of the only Nintendo games that really, like, can stress you out. Most Nintendo games are about those vibes and about taking things at your own pace, and sometimes you'll get, like, some hard levels in, like, end game Mario stuff, maybe, or some, Kirby boss battles. But otherwise, Nintendo is usually about chilling back and having the vibes. But Pikmin is about those vibes, but it's also about, oh god, I better get on this planet or Olimar's gonna fucking die and run out of oxygen, and the Pikmin are dying every night, and it's definitely a darker and more tense Nintendo series. Even though on the outside it's very... It's you got the xylophone music and guys with flowers running around. It's an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, I mean, they were talking about in this interview the way they were inspired by like Tim Burton and inspired by Fantastic Planet and
Mm,
various things and like indie cinema that
yeah,
was um, sort of popping up across Europe at the
yeah.
time, and
You and I
it's
just experienced indie cinema in theaters a couple weeks ago.
we did.
Dial of Destiny, baby.
Wild Destiny. Um, and it's cool hearing a Nintendo game both come from that, but then also come from Miyamoto's experience watching ants in his garden.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really fun melding of inspirations,
Mm,
taking this very very natural and very observation based
mm-hmm.
notion of just watching natural ecosystems,
Yeah.
but then sort of being informed by this very surreal and larger than life cinema and this
Yeah.
very avant-garde cinema is super cool. And I mean, like, Fantastic Planet, but just by happenstance I watched the other day,
Yeah.
and
Very
it's a
interesting, strange coincidence, crazy coincidence.
crazy coincidence, and it's a very and it's an incredible film and how peculiar it is
Yeah.
in the way that it constructs its world, but much like Pikmin itself, the way that it creates an internal logic.
Sure.
I think what's amazing about Pikmin is that there's a very solid internal logic to everything, and I think that's why it can support sort of the pressures that the game then imposes on you with the 30-day limit and various things,
Hmm.
because you know very clearly what the red Pikmin do. You know
Yeah.
very clearly what the yellow and the blue Pikmin do. You know how to get more Pikmin. You know
Hmm.
how to defeat enemies. There's a very simple set of intuitive piece of information that you need to put together
Yeah.
to understand how to play Pikmin. And
There are very few of them
yeah,
too. I mean, especially in Pikmin One, it's you're right. How to grow Pikmin, how to pick up things, how to beat enemies, and how to
yeah.
deal with three different kinds of Pikmin. That's
And,
basically it.
yeah, and then what it becomes is the archetypally Nintendo experience of saying, all right, we've defined exactly all of the mechanical interactions here. Now let's stretch them, and now let's see everything we can do with
Hmm.
them.
Yeah.
And what they do is they create this series of environments that are just so deliciously full of not only overt things to do, ship pieces to collect, enemies to
Yeah.
fight, but really exceptional world building in the
Hmm.
background, of even like picking up like a Geiger counter for Olimar's ship, the SS Dolphin.
Hmm.
Geiger counters for testing radiation. Obviously, PNF 404 is an analog for Earth.
Yeah.
And so it makes you sort of wonder what is sort of what's the background information of this world, and that's something that my friend Nate Ellingsworth turned me on to when he was writing about sort of the idea of like post-apocalypse and Pikmin for Lock On. I think it's really clever the ways that, starting with Pikmin 1, they fold all of these pressures and ideas into the game on top of what is a very simple set of mechanical interactions, and a very
Hmm.
clever one when you put together the fact that, as Nintendo talked about in the early GameCube days, they were now able to render a number of AI entities far
Hmm.
beyond anything they'd ever been able to do before. And
Yeah.
so within a
Yeah.
year of GameCube, they had put forth what is remains, in my opinion, even though it is now much rougher on the edges in
Yeah.
terms of like AI and stuff, a very sophisticated and almost like self-sufficient AI ecosystem,
Sure.
natural
Yeah.
ecosystem to explore.
Yeah. That technological leap is one of the first things that I ever knew about Pikmin, and I have not read the interview that you shared this morning, and I saw you maybe talking about this, but the idea that this was built on top of the hardware of a tech demo of a bunch of Marios running around.
Well,
Fake?
what's interesting about the interview is the interview does disprove that a little bit,
Okay.
because that has long been the sort of community narrative
Hmm.
around Pikmin, and what they're basically saying is that a lot of people working on Pikmin 1 had no clue that Mario 128 was even
Sure.
being made.
Sure.
So 128 was like a tech demo of like what the GameCube can do, but it
Mm.
wasn't the prototype for Pikmin. That ended up
Sure.
not being true at all, as they
Yeah, well,
said today.
the lineage, though, is true in terms of the technological leap of
Yeah,
the GameCube is now powerful enough to do
exactly.
this. And now that we can render 100 little dudes, what can we do with 100 little dudes?
Yeah.
And those kind of technological leaps apply to some other kinds of games that take advantage of hardware games, like especially Nintendo games, like 1-2 switch. We have this hardware. What can we do with this hardware now that we are not on the previous piece of
Yeah.
hardware? Nintendo Land, Wii Sports. But Pikmin is kind of the GameCube equivalent to that because GameCube didn't have a launch party game. I mean, it was testing the what it could do with particle physics and lighting and things like Luigi's Mansion, or water physics in Wave Race Blue Storm. But Pikmin, I think, is the most obvious example of a
Sure.
technological leap from N64 games being a lot simpler, a lot fewer characters on screen, and now Pikmin got these lush environments, very complex relatively, to the barren open fields of something like Ocarina of Time or Mario 64, to having a lot of little autonomous guys that are going off the screen and still doing something,
Yeah.
and they're running around big bosses, but it all runs very smoothly. And I love that step in technology fueling the creativity, what is possible design in a game, because that wasn't possible on previous hardware.
Yeah, and I also just like that all of this progress was funneled into such a natural game. And I mean
Yeah.
natural in the sense of ethos and aesthetics and
Mhm.
everything. Um, because I think that, like Pokemon, the game comes from a very natural and wondrous place of just thinking about how incredible the ecosystems around us
Yeah.
are. I mean, as Mr. Miyamoto said. And so to harness these new technical tools to bring you closer to nature, I think is a really exciting uh, uh,
Mm.
sort of ethos for the game you're making.
Yeah.
And part of the reason I do love Pikmin so much is because growing up in a rural part of Maine, that there's something about Pikmin that inherently sort of sparks the imagination I had when I was a kid and
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
playing with toys outside and trying to catch bugs and do various shit, in the woods, finding cool sticks to have sword fights
Mhm.
and whatever I was doing. I think Pikmin, even better than a lot of Nintendo's other very whimsical franchises, is able to sort of tap into that childlike sense of discovery and
Mm.
enjoyment and play.
Yeah.
And while Pikmin is a very tense experience, there are some things the game does to undercut that tension. Like you can just redo days. You can just flat out. It's a built-in.
Mhm.
It's not even shutting off the GameCube and just going again. The game literally lets you go back in previous days if you need to.
Mhm.
But there's nonetheless, I think, still a sense of sort of serenity and playfulness that
Yeah.
nicely sort of contrasts against the tension of trying to repair the SS Dolphin.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about that identity of naturalism and tiny dudes, because
Yeah,
that is the element that always appealed to me. Even though I
right.
heard that it was a pretty tense game, and to my eyes before I had played it, so complicated it scared me. The idea of tiny guys doing things for me and existing in this world where a strawberry or a root towers above them and becomes an obstacle, that is something that's always appealed to me. And
Yeah,
I can't pinpoint why in my development, but I can pinpoint other examples that show that, yeah, this is something that's always appealed to me. I Toy Story has always been one of my favorite
sure.
things, period. I mean, Toy Story 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 when that came out are some of my favorite movies. And just the idea that the environment that we take for granted are mountains and
Yeah,
rivers and dangerous to a smaller creature. Toy Story being the example of that, but taking that inspiration. And I was not as much of an out in the woods kind of guy as you were, because I lived in a city and there's not as much out in the woods in the city. Um, but I was very Toy Story in real life kind of kid.
yeah,
I have some of my toys behind me, minifigures, bouncy balls, stuffed animals that I created histories for
sure.
and personalities, and they had these relationships. And when I did a battle between them or built a thing out of Legos, that became a part of their lineage. And
Yeah,
I drew comics about my own toys, the Adventures of Wii U. I had this whole thing, and I've always just had a strange fascination with the minute, and that extends also out to insects and other arthropods and arachnids, because I was an entomology minor for multiple years in college. I did drop that because I realized this is not going to help me, but it was fun. And did I get 110 in my ento classes? Yes.
And you have a bunch of fucking creepy bugs in your room right
I do.
now.
I have two containers with two different tarantulas in them. They're up there. And yeah, I just I it's part of my life, and
Yeah.
it becomes less so. But Pikmin is able to recapture that as I sit at my desk and play video games and edit videos. I'm not going outside as much. I
Right.
don't have the free time to dick around with my toys and come up with a fantastical adventure for them. But Pikmin can replace that. Pikmin is my childhood whimsy squashed down into a mini CD.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I wrote a piece for the Gamer to that exact idea.
You
Uh,
copied me,
I copied you.
basically.
I've got the receipts of it first. I
I promise you, I did not read that article. I never do.
I because you're totally right. I don't. If I'm going outside, I'm going outside to go for a run, and that's about
Yeah.
it. Like that's about, or I'm going to the beach sometimes. But
Mm-hmm.
what do you have time for, really? I mean, I've got time at night to play some games
Some Pikmin.
after work and everything. And
Yeah.
you're totally right. I think that like Nintendo's best series, it just so acutely captures that feeling. And I
Mm-hmm.
really do think Pikmin is a game about feelings. It's sort of the feeling of discovery as you learn more about the creatures that live in these environments,
Yeah.
and it's also about, as you're saying, these feelings of wonderment and
Mm.
this feelings of scientific curiosity, which
Yeah.
Olimar himself promotes through the
Yeah.
logs and through a lot
Definitely.
of the framing of the narrative about how you learn what Pikmin are. You're learning about them
Yeah.
through an explorer's set of eyes, and I think
Yeah,
that's
and he's
super cool.
talking about like, hey, he's talking about I arrived on this planet and I didn't know what to do and I met these things and this is what their behaviors are like.
Yeah,
How could I use this to my advantage? And that building up not only across the course of the game but across the course of the series as we get more characters' perspectives on it and we learn a little bit more about the world itself. I think that development that happens very slowly across the course of Pikmin games because the amount of world and characters, whether that is literally captains, side characters, or Pikmin themselves, increases drip by drip over the course of the games. But even taking the step into Pikmin 2, where that wonderment at the world around you is fueled, I think, even greater by finding the treasures, which are
yeah.
actual branded everyday objects. In Pikmin 2 as the main collectible, that is something that I find super compelling. And I think that's also one of your favorite elements of Pikmin 2 is finding that Duracell battery or the Game Boy or the Game & Watch or whatever it is and reading the little description that calls it something funny and guesses what its use is
Yeah.
for. And I love that they have they brought that back in Pikmin 3 with different kinds of fruit and lots of fun names, but in Pikmin 4 it's synthesizing all of that, and I really expect the collection log and the descriptions from this vast variety of characters that we're going to have in Pikmin 4 to be one of my favorite elements of that game because starting with Pikmin 2, getting those the descriptions and the names and it really fleshes out what not only the world is but how these alien characters see the world that we know that we take for granted. I really love that element of Pikmin.
Yeah, I agree. It's a sort of outsider's lens. It's not
Mm-hmm.
only a scientist lens. It's a alien scientist
Yeah.
lens. And you're totally right that the other component of Pikmin that is so great is the humor to it, and the
Yeah,
humor is so
definitely.
evident in what you're talking about, but it's also evident in the narrative of Pikmin 2,
Mm-hmm.
because the president of Hocotate Freight fucked everything I think that the narrative relationship between 1 and 2 is so clever because
So funny.
you're away for Pikmin 1. The president of the company fucks everything, so he sends you back to go make
Mm-hmm.
money to pay off all of his debts.
With Louis in tow.
Yeah, and then the whole time, every day, now you're getting messages from the president about how he's living in a box under a bridge, and he's
Mm-hmm.
being harassed by animals, and like I think Pikmin 2 and all the Pikmin games, but especially Pikmin 2, is a very smart game. I
Sure.
think it's more pointed than a lot of Nintendo titles
Mm.
about sort of notions like corporate greed and sort of the consumerism and sort of taking stock of what we left behind
Yeah.
and sort of
It'd
the
be
way.
actually very interesting to do a look into Nintendo games that focus on capitalism and
Yeah,
corporate greed because there are a few when you really
yeah,
think about it. Something like Planet Robobot or some of the WarioWare games. That there's a silent genre in the background of Nintendo games that focus on capitalism. And Pikmin 2, one of the earliest examples of that.
Yeah, I mean the one that came just a couple years after, obviously just published by Nintendo, but Chibi Robo, which is another
Sure.
one of my favorite games on GameCube, not only is I think it has sort of larger themes on the brain the way that Pikmin 2 does, but Chibi Robo really catalyzed for me something I love about games, which is sort of when they make you pay close attention to your environment and learn it very specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're playing as Chibi Robo and you're this little guy in a big house, you come to know very acutely how you get around and how you climb and how you get around the centers in the house. And it is quite similar in all the Pikmin games. Pikmin 1, Pikmin 2, as you sort of optimize the overworld. It gets this copy of Dandori, which is this Japanese idea of doing tasks more efficiently and finding joy in that efficiency. Like,
you will learn that when you play Pikmin 4.
You will learn that, and
maybe too much.
Yeah, and I mean, Dandori, as I was saying in this interview, has always been a guiding star for the series, and they're really foregrounding it in 4. But like this idea that you achieve this concept of Dandori by better understanding the spaces around you. I think is really exciting, and it's a sign of game design that I really appreciate, and it's something that Pikmin I think inherently instills into you as you sort of learn its small open worlds that are connected by obviously just a world map as best as you can. And 2 is interesting because, as we were saying before, it is sort of a sidestep in a lot of ways in terms of a lot of the design decisions made by Pikmin 1. But in some ways, it is also 2 just a fairly iterative sequel of saying, let's do more. Let's give you more Pikmin types. Let's give you more captains. Let's give you multiplayer. Let's give you mission mode. Let's give you just more and more and more and more. And so I think the impulses of Pikmin 2 are really good. I just personally am not crazy about the caves. I'm not crazy about sort of the applications of the purple and white Pikmin in particular.
Sure.
But Pikmin 2, I think, in its experimental nature, is one of the most interesting Nintendo games that Nintendo's ever made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Pikmin's weird balance, but I think good balance between naturalism and gaminess. Yeah. Because the environments are small hills, and you got a leaf floating down a river or a log, and those are the things that you're going to be interacting with and exploring and using as like sort of the towering things around you. But it also is not afraid to have some natural, but when you really think about it for more than 2 seconds, incredibly dumb gamey things like caves that you drop down a hole and it's just like sometimes there's like cogs down there, and like sometimes you drop to like a child's bedroom.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't make any fucking sense. Or even the element that I was sort of, as I was thinking about this point, even in the overworld, sometimes there are like 2-inch tall electrical gates.
Yeah, or like
that doesn't make any sense.
Or like maze, like labyrinth type mazes you got to walk through and things like that. Yeah.
But I do like that it doesn't lean all the way into naturalism, because it does allow it to have a little bit more gaminess in that having electricity for the electric Pikmin or the yellow Pikmin to interact with is a fun mechanic and differentiates them, and it makes it very clear when you approach an area, okay, this thing's on fire, this thing's on electricity, and this thing's on water. And so I know which things to go to. But it's because it's not, like, there would be no electricity if the game only sided with naturalism, but it allows itself the leeway in its naturalism to have little electric fences that don't make they make no sense. The people that supposedly lived here would never have built that. Why would they have fucking built that? But I like that it's a little bit weird, a little bit gamey.
Yeah, I agree. And it's sort of what I was saying before. If Pikmin kind of defines what it's trying to do very clearly, and the games all interpret that in similar but sort of different fashions. Yeah. But they also leave space. I will say, though, that I do... Part of what if we can transition to it a little bit, is Pikmin 3.
Perfect. I was just about to go there.
Part of what I really do like about Pikmin 3 is that the environment, the nature of the environments is more important to that game than it is to Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 2.
Definitely.
When you think about riding, and you gave the example already, but riding the leaf down the river and sort of having almost like a couple different like leaf bus stops that you can get off at, or like the enemies that shoot the snowballs at you or various things. I think Pikmin 3 does a better job at walking towards this idea of the environments feeling more properly natural, I guess you could
Yeah,
say, or I
yeah,
guess more authentically natural is maybe the way
sure.
to phrase it. And because Pikmin does sort of carry these connotations of my childhood in a rural place, I do tend to lean towards preferring that. And
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
really excited to see Pikmin 4's approach to it, because what Pikmin 4 is doing is, I think, leaning into what you're saying is the balance of the gaminess with the naturalism by introducing more man-made structures into the
Yeah.
environment, which allow them to, I think, more inherently tailor understandable puzzles to things, opposed
Hmm.
to saying that, like, okay, in this area there's going to be a big body of water, and on the other side of the body of water is going to be like these weird perfectly like square and rectangular maze like structures you got to throw your blue and yellow Pikmin around in.
Hmm.
So I think that that notion in 4 is going to be handled really well. And I
Yeah.
think one of 3's major accomplishments, and it's partially because the game is in HD and it looks so beautiful, but one of its major
Yeah.
accomplishments, I think, is really doubling down on the natural beauty and natural sense of the world.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the difference in direction between the three games, though, yeah. So one is more natural but has mild gaming, not real elements to it. Two leans into that with especially the introduction of caves, but also the introduction of the man-made elements in the treasures allow a, as you were saying, a gamified naturalness.
Yeah.
Like, okay, there are collectibles and they're scattered randomly. Like, it doesn't make any sense someone would have left whatever this is there, but it does feel natural because it's a little thing that
Yeah.
we could see sitting on top of a log or a hill, and yeah, it makes sense. But I do think that Pikmin 3 does feel distinct in that it eschews that largely, and does experiment a little bit more with environment designs. You get snow areas, as you mentioned. There's a lot more variety in what they do with little brooks and leafy areas, and I think part of that allows Pikmin 3 to be one of my to be my favorite in the series. I think
Yeah.
that naturalism and especially the way that it expands by adding a new cast of characters completely new, and more Pikmin types that are more natural as opposed to the purple and white Pikmins introduced in Pikmin 2.
Yeah.
Rock Pikmin and Flying Pikmin look a lot more natural and they feel a lot more integrated into this environment. And I love that naturalism angle, but I think that again, continuing that tradition onward, Pikmin 4 is that balance of Pikmin 3 and 2 where it is more gamified, but it's man-made, so
Yeah.
therefore it's also more natural and it gives us more environment variety and more puzzle variety, more concept variety. And I'm very interested to see once we've played Pikmin 4, the nearing the end of the game, areas that we get to visit, the puzzle that they introduce, because we have no idea. And also the naturalism of Pikmin 4 extends to nighttime, which the
Yeah.
series has never tackled. And I think that's going to be very, very fascinating to see where by the end of that game we feel on in terms of how it handled the naturalism and the gamified elements.
Yeah, because I mean, Pikmin 3 it does, as I was saying, it does take pieces of 1 and 2 and put them together. I mean, it takes Pikmin 2's impulse to do more. It takes its impulse to add more captains and complicate gameplay that way and complicate it with new Pikmin types. But it also, in some ways, returns to Pikmin 1. And they were even talking about this in the interview, saying that there was, in large part, a return to a lot of the philosophies of Pikmin 1 with that overarching time pressure. And even though it's I'm I'm of the opinion that the time pressure in Pikmin 1 isn't huge, but I think it's pretty much objectively true that the time pressure in Pikmin 3 is even less of
Yeah.
an obstacle to anybody. So
It's objectively true that Pikmin 1 has the most time pressure.
yes, that's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I don't think that Pikmin 3 so evenly borrows from both. But as
Mhm.
we were sort of talking about in the Discord server, it really looks like Pikmin 4 is borrowing from all of them and
Yeah.
also establishing a new identity, which is
Yeah.
still nonetheless hinging around these core concepts that inspired Pikmin, but it's just complicating it some.
Mhm.
And having maybe a different set of design intents for certain elements
Yeah.
of its gameplay. And I think that's really great because I also am with you. I think Pikmin 3 is also my favorite.
Mhm.
Even though Pikmin 1, I feel like every time I play it, it gets a little bit closer to 3
Sure. Sure.
to be close
Yeah.
to tied for my favorite. Um, but I'm excited to see the lessons learned from that game in addition to 1 and 2 because I feel like it's one that's less talked about as being a like a third style of Pikmin because it
Sure.
isn't really. But even as
Yeah.
Miyamoto and the others are saying in this interview, even they think of there being Pikmin 1 people and Pikmin 2 people, right?
Sure.
But I think
Yeah,
that 3 does still have a lot to offer
absolutely.
in how it gave you a greater degree of acute control over the
Mhm.
other captains, and it allowed them to send them off on their own tasks, and
Yeah,
how it seems like that is pretty clearly kind of becoming Ochi in some ways,
yeah.
and sort of the impulse, as you're saying, to create a more natural world, as we've been talking about.
Hmm.
um, I think that's all really great.
Yeah,
So I'll be very curious to see moving forward, um, what 4 does to synthesize all this. But
yeah, definitely.
Tucker, what else do you want to say about Pikmin?
Well, one thing that I think is underappreciated about Pikmin in our modern time is that it has diversified itself. We talked about at the beginning that the series is very consistent and relatively stagnant. You really got to be in the know to know the differences between 1, 2, and 3. But there are 2 spin off games, and I have played both of them to a rather large extent, certainly larger than
Yeah,
most people who play anything or who exist. And I like both
yeah,
of the spin-off Pikmin games. And I think that they, for me, are very important to showing that the franchise has, in its uniqueness, potential to add that uniqueness to other gameplay styles. The vibe of Pikmin, as you talked about, is something that can be translated to other types of games, and the mechanics of Pikmin.
yeah,
And focusing in a little bit first on Hey Pikmin, a game that I played through in a couple of days because I actually, frankly, enjoyed it quite a lot. The ideas that Pikmin has at its very base level of commanding a group of little guys and throwing them around to carry things around, that's not something that almost any other game franchise does. And the idea of placing that in a 2D platformer environment, making it a little bit more about resource management and puzzles rather than actual platforming, makes Hey Pikmin feel like a completely different beast than any other of the dozens and dozens and dozens of 2D platforms I've played in my life. This is a Pikmin 2D platformer, and I am throwing guys onto the top screen, and I'm managing boss battles in a different way than I would in any other kind of 2D platforming game or 2D game period. So I think that Hey Pikmin especially is one of the most underrated elements of Pikmin in terms of its possibility.
yeah.
And I really do appreciate Hey Pikmin, and I've come to appreciate it more the more time that has passed since I played it.
Yeah, I mean, I have not played that much Hey Pikmin. I would like to play more of it. But so I kind of defer to you on that one. But I think Pikmin Bloom, while it's a limited game, is also a very exciting game in that
Mm,
it, much like the massive merch push we've seen Nintendo
mm,
undergo recently, and the great marketing links they're going to for Pikmin 4 is just illustrative of how the Pikmin IP is being used in wider ways, because it's a
yeah.
very flexible IP because it has such iconic and lovingly designed characters.
Mm,
That's a beautiful part of Pikmin, is just how thoughtful and funny, frankly, so many of the
yeah.
designs are, and so much of the animation is, and that's why like the Pikmin shorts are so great. And
Mm,
Pikmin Bloom is just another way to connect to the world and bring you closer to the natural world that they want you to
yeah.
be in tune with in the first place. And that's all to say that when you look at Hey Pikmin, when you look at Pikmin Bloom, when you look at all the new merchandise, when you look at the Pikmin shorts that were released a couple years back,
Hmm.
it just speaks to this universal quality that the series has. It's endearing
Yeah.
and fun, and it will hopefully result in 4 just being a massive, massive success. And I
Yeah.
hope it is. And I think Nintendo's positioning it that way. And
Definitely.
so, with any luck,
And
Tucker,
and the community
yeah,
is pushing it that way as well with
yeah,
guerrilla marketing tactics in
in
Times
Times
Square
Square.
currently. But I really do think that we are on the cusp of Pikmin being that universal appeal. You
Yeah,
say that, and I think it's true on like a concept level, but Pikmin is still a
it's a
pun
niche
intended
series.
microscopic
Yeah,
franchise. They don't sell particularly well. There haven't been that many entries. It's 10 years between. It, it's been 20 years, and only 2 mainline games have released or will have released by the time you're watching this video, and that shows that it is a less of a priority. But I think it could be more of a priority now. We saw spin-offs and then 3 Deluxe and Pikmin Bloom introducing a lot more people to Pikmin. I mean, every other Pikmin game combined times, I don't know, like multiple dozens is how
yeah,
many people have at least even seen Pikmin Bloom. And that push, the merch push, Nintendo making this a big deal in multiple of their recent directs and having it have a full marketing campaign, not only
yeah.
out in the world but on lots of trailers and social media ads. poisons Pikmin 4 to be the biggest one, and I don't think
Yeah.
that's of any doubt, but also maybe the catalyst for this franchise becoming something bigger in the future. And I would really love to see not just Pikmin 5 on the next system, though I think that is probably kind of likely if and when this game is significantly bigger than all the previous iterations, but also, as I was saying about with Bloom and Hey Pikmin, applying Pikmin's world and mechanics and identity to other types of games. I really do think that the idea of being small and of managing a group of little guys, these can be applied to other things, as Hey Pikmin has shown. And I'd really love to see the franchise, pun intended, blossom and branch out, pun intended,
Yeah.
to other games. I'd love to see some spin-offs especially the next system.
Yeah, exactly. As you're saying, the series has never sold especially well, but I think the care being shown to it right now, and the fact that just anecdotally, I think both you and I have experienced the fact that there is a quality to Pikmin that even people who aren't familiar with the series gravitate to.
Yeah.
And hopefully 4 is just their way into the door. But Tucker,
Mm-hmm.
we're already in the door.
Dandori.
The Dandori. The Dandori.
We're already in the door.
We're already in the door. We'll be back soon to talk about Pikmin 4 in full when we have finished it.
Oh yeah.
But in the meantime, tell us your thoughts anywhere you want to tell us to us, to them, to us. And we'll talk with you more about Pikmin soon. Pikmin.
Is that your classic catchphrase?
My classic catchphrase.